I got the CRT out, and I was in for a bit of a surprise. This is not a 16-inch picture tube, it is a 17-inch, so that sales flyer was correct. 17 BP4B, so this is an aluminized CRT as well. I did not realize 17 BP4Bs were available in March of 51. Not assuming this is the original. And I have no idea if it really is or not. That label makes me think it's a rebuild, and yeah, I can definitely feel the weld right here. A very noticeable bump on it. So, I'm not going to be using this, although I could probably make it fit. There's enough leeway with these clamps. But, I can scavenge up a 17 BP4B. Here's a look at the tube chart inside the cabinet, and it does not designate the picture tube. Now let's take a look at the service info. First up here is the SAMs, and it's a 16KP4 or 16RP4. And here's the riders. Same deal. Now, the problem with this, though, is that the models are actually 420, 423, 424. Same goes for the SAMs. The chassis are pretty much the same, so I guess they didn't bother to do separate service info for the 430. In the rider's index, they just say to refer to this. However, I don't think that's quite true, because remember there's a 3/8 amp fuse jack on the back of the set? That's not shown in these schematics. Also, there's a color adapter connection on the back of my chassis, and I don't think that's in here either. Central Carlson, not too far. I've started taking a look at some of the instructions for setting this thing up too, and it's pretty freaking complicated. There's all the instructions just for setting up the horizontal hold, centering the picture, adjusting the horizontal lock, horizontal drive, ion trap. I especially want to take a look at this. They say it's critical to adjust that properly, and I did not go through and do this before. I started checking my tubes, and I noticed something odd right away. I have a 6J5 metal tube in mine. It's the original, and that's what they show on the tube chart for a vertical oscillator discharge. But service info has a 6K6, and that's the SAMs, and the riders shows a 6K6 as well, and then the vertical output 6S4 or 6K6. So neither one of these match my set, in other words. However, if I look in the index, model 430, same as page 6.1, which is 424 and 423, which is what I'm looking at. Now, in the early 50s, they made a lot of production. Everybody was making lots of production changes because the volume just exploded, and then there were shortages during the Korean conflict, so that's why you see a lot of odd things in sets. Like, potentially 3 different tubes were used in this section, and I've worked on some Admiral sets that had parts from Japan or West Germany, so I imagine they were doing wacky stuff with these Sentinels as well. But what I'm going to check out is, it's also in volume 7.1, there's a 432. I'm going to check that out, and maybe that's closer to what I've got. So, let's see. I remember going through all this when I restored it the first time around. I think what I ended up doing is I just, whatever the tube chart said and whatever component was currently in the set, that's what I went with. And I just glossed over the differences on the service info. So the part looks pretty much the same. Yeah, this is a 6SN7 for the vertical oscillator. Yeah, I can tell this layout's different. Tube layout's different. Otherwise, though, it's actually quite similar. It's funny how they actually, yeah, it looks pretty much the same otherwise. It's funny that they went through so many different changes for the just a vertical oscillator tube. So at some point these are 6J5, then a 6K6, and a 6SN7, whereas all the rest of it seems to be the same. Speaking of that 6J5 tube, I'm testing it now and got a plate short, and when I check the emissions, that's well into the bad. It's funny how a tube can be so crappy, but it still functions in the set. This is used for the vertical oscillator, so I guess the oscillator can keep running even though the tube is lousy, so that will definitely get replaced. It's probably one of the original tubes too, because it's Sentinel branded. Also found one of the 6K6s. It's Ward's Airline. It had an intermittent plate short and the emissions weren't so hot, so I'm going to replace that as well. I'm testing the 6 CB6s used in the IF stages now, and check this one out. Got a couple shorts, cathode and suppressor, I think that is. Tons of secondary emission. And lousy emissions. Yet the set was playing fairly well. Amazing. I have to believe it's going to work a lot better when I replace that tube. And one of the others, I believe, had a short as well. Yeah, it was this, another 6CB6 plate short and horrible emissions. I'm amazed that this set played as well as it did with these lousy tubes in it. I forgot there were a few more tubes inside the high voltage cage, so now I'm checking 6SN7 horizontal oscillator, and check this out. Almost dead. Both sections. I just got back from my storage locker with what I'm pretty sure is a 17BP4B. I haven't looked at it since I got it and put it in the storage over a year ago now. Be careful when I take this out, or I'm going to have foam peanuts everywhere. That might be a rebuild too. Well, crap. It's not aluminized. And neither is this one that I got off of eBay a few months ago. Well, I know this one has some life left because I used it when I was restoring to do my RA113. And when I tested this, it tested like new. Can't quite tell if it's a rebuild or not. If they did rebuild it, did a real nice job because there's barely any ripple on the neck. Whereas this one's really obvious. But on the other hand, there's no brand on the base. So I'm not sure. But it's not aluminized. So it's going to be inferior to the one that was in my set. So, other than going out and trying to find a 17BP4B, the only other option I can think of presently is to pull the picture tube out of this set. It's a Motorola set I did a few videos on a while ago. I called it a Frankenrolla because it's a mismatch of cabinet and chassis and picture tube. So the one picture tube I just showed you, I actually got two of them from the same seller. This is the other one. I don't recall if it's aluminized or not, and the only way I'm going to find out is to pull the set out and pull the chassis out and see what's actually in there. The Sentinel is a more valuable, nicer set than this one, so I don't mind sacrificing the picture tube from this set for the other one. Otherwise, I don't have any other 17-inch sets other than an Admiral that's got a shorted heater cathode short in its picture tube, and I got a Motorola that has a busted picture tube in it. Those are the other two 17-inch sets I've got. Here's the CRT out of that Motorola, and it's not aluminized either, so that's it. I'm out of options. I'll just have to go with one of these non-aluminized versions. Maybe someday I'll come across one, and in the meantime I'll use one of these. Not the end of the world. I mean, most of my sets do not have aluminized picture tubes, but they are nice to have if you can get them. They do produce a brighter, crisper picture. So I'm going to go with the one that I just pulled out of storage after all. Of the three 17 BP4s I've got lying around right now, this one looks to be in the best cosmetic condition. All the outer conductive coatings in place, and it tests just great. Life test is solid, so this is going to go into the Sentinel. Here's a peek underneath the chassis for the Sentinel. I have a whole restoration series on this if you want to go back and watch through that. As I've been reviewing my notes, it's all coming back to me about what a pain this thing was to work on because it just didn't match any of the service info. And this definitely was made during the time of parts shortages, so there are some funky resistors like this, which I think is from West Germany. These guys, yeah, these are German. And crazy things like this where they put 4 resistors together to get the right value. Oh, and as far as the fuse goes, it's not fused on the AC line, it's fused on the B plus supply. I don't think I've ever encountered that before. So these two red wires are going to the 5U4 rectifier, and this is the center tap, which would normally be grounded. Instead it goes through this 3/8 amp fuse and then over to ground. So it's just a fuse on the B plus supply, not the whole set. All in all, I ended up replacing about 6 vacuum tubes, and here it is with the new picture tube installed. Just got to tighten down these straps, and then I'll power it up. Then we'll see where things stand. I'll probably do a little bit of tweaking with the yoke and centering controls, and I'll get test pattern generator going and check out the bandwidth and linearity. And if things look really good, I might skip the alignment because it's a little fiddly on this set, but if the bandwidth test doesn't look that good, well, we'll go through and do the alignment.
Mrs. Winston? Yes. I'm selling brushes. We have a nice one.
Alright, let's give this a try. Let's see. No speaker hooked up, so don't expect any sound. And you got to adjust the ion drive magnet. Get the brightness and contrast cranked all the way up. There we go. Alright, so part of it seems successful. Some lines on the side, adjusting the drive should take care of that. That's something I noticed before when I was first restored this set. I was going through my photos I'd taken, and when I turn the brightness down, it's not uniform. It's brighter at the bottom than at the top. I'm not sure what that's all about. Well, I do have one thought. I did experiment with vertical retrace suppression. There was a retrace suppression circuit in the set, and I tinkered a bit with the values. That involves using a resistor and capacitor to pick off a vertical retrace pulse and blank out the picture during the retrace interval. If I got my RC time constants right, could very well be it gets to the bottom, it blanks it out, and when the electron gets back to the top and starts going down again, the charge isn't bled off and it gradually gets brighter. So something I definitely want to take a look at. I'll try disabling that entirely. Alright, so let's hook up a signal source and see how things look. I fired up my VA62, and right now I've got the multi-burst pattern, which lets you test the bandwidth, and it's solid out to 3 megahertz. This is 3.5, 4, and 4.5. So it's not bad, but it'd be nice to see a little bit more distinction into these two areas. So I suppose I can go through the alignment, especially since I just changed a bunch of tubes, and when I recapped it and changed out some resistors the first time around, it didn't do an alignment. So changing that kind of stuff can throw things off a little bit. And otherwise, the picture's pretty well centered. I adjusted the yoke. The picture had been crooked. Now it's pretty well straight up and down. One thing I want to check is the focus. It seems to be a little bit blurry in the middle and sharper on the outer edges. The lines are kind of more distinct there and get wider down here. This set doesn't have a focus control. It's all mechanical. This assembly here is magnetic. And there are adjustment screws on the back, so I gotta fiddle around with those and see if I can improve the focus any. The schematic in the rider service info might not match my set perfectly, but they do give really sound instructions for adjusting the yoke, the ion trap magnet, and the focus magnet, so I went through that. One thing in particular that was driving me nuts was that you're supposed to adjust the ion trap magnet for maximum brightness, which I did, but I ended up having shadows in the upper and lower right corners, and they say that that's okay. Don't use that magnet to eliminate those shadows. Instead, there's another procedure, there's another nut you can adjust in the back that actually tweaks the focus magnet. This set does not use an electromagnet for focusing. It's a permanent magnet. And there are a couple adjustments you can make on that. So here's where we're at. So here's the multi-burst test pattern. Looking pretty good out to about 3 megahertz. And this crosshatch, which is pretty good. Some slight geometry issues here and there, like in the upper left, slightly different from the bottom left, but that's pretty typical for sets like this. You're just not going to get it perfect. And I think this dot pattern, you can pretty clearly see how I've got that issue where it's brighter at the bottom and at the top. It's kind of funky too. When I put my hand on the screen, it really affects the deflection of it. So next thing I want to try doing is track down where that modification is for the vertical retrace suppression and temporarily disable it and see if it eliminates that odd issue of the bottom being brighter than the top. I've been going back through what service info I do have and photos I'd taken and the write-up I did on Video Karma when I originally did this project, and I'm starting to figure out a few things. For sure this set it doesn't match any of the service info, so it's a bit challenging, but by tracing things out, I did figure out where the vertical retrace modification is, and that's this right here. So here's vertical output tap, which is this green wire right here, I believe. Hard to tell, the colors are kind of gone. But this is going to the yoke, this green wire going through the chassis. And here is a resistor in series with a capacitor going to a lug, goes to a wire that feeds through here, and eventually goes around to this point. This point has a capacitor going to ground, and a resistor going over to the brightness control, and a wire going to the CRT socket. So that has got to be this point right here. So there's the 0.05 going to ground, there's 220K going to the brightness control. So right here is where it's running over to this. This has to be the vertical retrace suppression. So I'm going to disconnect this and then fire the set back up. And I expect the retrace lines will become visible, but I'm hoping that that weird shading effect where it's getting brighter at the bottom of the screen goes away. How about that? Problem is gone. So uniform brightness. So before, when I had this pattern up, it would be bright at the bottom and gradually darkening out. Picture looks a bit messed up though. I wonder if something kind of got knocked out of kilter. It's a bit more tilted and well, maybe that retrace modification had some impact on that. I'm not sure, but regardless, problem's going. You know what? The retrace lines, they're not really there unless I really crank the brightness up. That's these diagonal lines here. Turn the brightness down a little, they're gone. So maybe with having a nice bright, strong CRT in there, it's just not an issue. So I'm going to leave it out. I'll clean up the lead ends and maybe make a note to myself about that modification. It's not crazy about the screen geometry though, so I want to play around with that a little bit more. One thing I noticed is that, look how that's setting in there. This cup is supposed to be concentric, firmly seated all the way around. There's a huge gap at the top and none at the bottom. That's what supports the CRT. So I can go to the back of the neck and I can kind of deflect it upwards. It's not seated in there as much as as nicely as I'd like it to be. And look at this is kind of bent too. Now that could well be just the evolution of this set, because originally it seems like it was a 16-inch CRT, then they went to a 17. And even though I have a nice 16, I couldn't really put it in here because these straps and all that are bent and follow the curvature of this nicely. If I put the 16 in, there's a gap around it. So I got to stick with this. But I want to see if I can get it to sit in there better. So there are various things you can adjust. In particular, this whole top box can slide back and forth. Kind of hard to get at, but there are, I think it's 2 bolts on either side I can loosen up. And then this loosens up, and this loosens up. So I want to see if I can get that any better. Because that kind of affects how the yoke presses up against the bell as well. Now, it may just be that I just will have to live with it. I mean, it's supported firmly enough. It's not like the set's going to get knocked around a whole lot. But I'm just not real happy with the way that that's situated. Something else I was wondering about is this lug right here. It doesn't go to anything. There's a wire coming up from below and just goes to this terminal and there's nothing attached to it. Well, I mentioned that there's a complex or seemingly complex procedure for adjusting some controls down in here that have to do with the horizontal drive and linearity and width. And part of the instructions is to monitor the bias on the grid of the horizontal output tube, which is inside this cage. Not so easy to do. I figured I'd have to tack a wire below or put the set on its side or something. It turns out that's what this is for. This goes to the grid of the horizontal output tube, so you can monitor the voltage from up here, which was rather convenient of them. So I'm going to save that for the next part. I'm going to fool around with this mechanical stuff, see if I can get this any better, and then start making these adjustments and run through a quick alignment, I hope, and that should be it.